Hello everyone, it's Bence. I would like to try a new format for devlogs. Well, this is a video format which I've never done before, but let's see how it works. So I've recently uploaded my newest game on itch.io. It's called Forest Adventure. It was made for a game jam, well, therefore it's relatively short. And I would like to share with you today how the enemies work in the game. So the enemies in this game are basically invisible monsters. They patrol some parts of the level, and when the player gets relatively close to them, they enter, well, alert mode and try to hit the enemy. Hit the player. But the player has a weapon against them. It's a torchlight with which they can shine a light on the enemies, and when that happens, the enemy freezes, they become stone, and the player can use them as platforms to get to the upper sections of the level. But when the light is no longer shining on the enemies, they return back to their invisible states and start attacking or patrolling again, depending on the position of the player. I have opened the project in Unity, and here we have the enemy prefab. We have heat trigger, alert trigger, and the rest is just audio and graphics, so that's not important for us right now. What is important is this alert trigger and the hit trigger itself. The enemy has two main states, and one of the states can be divided into two sub-states. So one of the main states of the enemy is when it is stone. In that case, the enemy does not move, it is visible, and it cannot damage the player, but it can collide with it, because otherwise the player would not be able to climb on top of it. The other state is when the enemy is alive. It means that it is invisible, it is able to move, patrol between walls, or chase the player, and it can damage the player by touching it. However, it cannot collide with it. This is important because otherwise the enemy would be able to squeeze the player between itself and a wall, and the player would not be able to escape. So this was important. And as I mentioned, this alive state can be divided into two sub-states. One is that the enemy patrols, which means that it basically just moves, and when it hits a collider with a wall tag, it will just multiply its velocity by -1 and this way turn around. And the other state is the alert state. It means that it gets the player's X coordinate and tries to go to that place. So basically it just follows the coordinate, not the player, but that's how the game works. Again, this is the hit trigger. This is the trigger which can damage the player, as well as this trigger will turn into a collider that the player will be able to climb if the enemy is in a stone state. And this is the alert trigger, in which if the player enters, the enemy will enter into the alert mode. Let's see the codes. I just want to explain how the codes work structurally. I don't want to explain everything, but if you need, I can upload it somewhere, maybe GitHub. I've never used it before, but I try. So the enemy uses 3 scripts. One is called, I named it enemy patrol. What it does is that basically moves the enemy depending on the mode. So it can either go into patrol mode or alert mode. This is the enemy alert. It's basically the script that tells the enemy if the player is within this trigger or not, and switches between alert and patrol mode. And this is the last script, which enables the enemy to react to the light of the flashlight. So let's go through each script one by one. So in the first script, which was called enemy patrol, we can modify the speed when patrolling, the speed when in alert mode. We need to locate the player itself, and we have two Boolean type variables. One is the Boolean for alert mode, and one is the Boolean for stone mode. Also, we store the position of the player in a vector. So in the start function, we look for the player, store its position, and we switch both the alert mode and stone mode to false. This is needed because we don't want our enemy to start in a stone state or in an alerted state. They just patrol. So in the update function, with each update we check if the alert mode is active and the enemy is not in a stone state. If this is both true, I mean this is false, but if this is the case, then the enemy enters alert mode. However, if alert mode is false and the stone mode is false as well, the enemy just patrols. If the stone mode is true, then the enemy becomes stone. Well, it's just a debug message. It's not that important. I should have just return here. It's not important. This part is something I will explain later. So, what happens in the patrol mode? We just translate the enemy with a given speed in the x-axis, and basically that's it. However, if our enemy enters a trigger, actually stays in a trigger which has a wall tag, then it will just multiply its speed by -1 and go to the other direction. This extra bit of code here is just preventing the enemy to do funny things like not being able to turn around properly. Yeah, otherwise it can get stuck in walls. And the next function is the alert mode. What it does is that it asks the X position of the player, and it also asks the Y position of this. Yeah, but basically this is the vector that our enemy must follow. So the X position is the current position of the player, the Y position is the current position of the player, but we override that with the current Y position of the enemy, because we do not want the enemy to be able to, well, float in the air or go under the walkable surface. So that's why this line is needed. And when we have these two data, then we are just moving our enemy towards this target position. And here we have three functions. One to set the stone mode to true, one to set it to false, and one to communicate with this script to set the alert mode to the desired value. So basically these scripts are just here to communicate, I mean these methods are just here to communicate with these two scripts here. So let's see the enemy alert script. What it does is that it basically has 4 methods. So yeah, again remember this is the big trigger. If something enters the trigger with a tag player, then we are changing this alert mode boolean to true, and this is the case if something with a player tag stays within the trigger. Of course, and the player exits the trigger, then the alert mode boolean will be turned to false. And we are just so when one of these trigger events happen, we just set the desired value and then call with this function or method. We are calling this and setting this alert mode value here in this function to the desired value. So basically this is what this script does, and this is the last one, which enables the enemy to be able to react to the light of the flashlight. So this is just sounds and graphics, it's not important. What we are interested is this. So first of all, we are referencing the enemy game object itself. We have a collider. This is this one here. As you can see, it's turned off as default, and we will only turn it on when the enemy is in a stone state. And we are also changing the materials, but that's not important anymore. Then we have this wait time. I will explain what it does. And the current time, this is related to the wait time. And we have also these two boolean values, which I will explain in a moment. So what this function does is that it checks if the enemy is in stone state and will get executed accordingly. So this is where we start. If something enters the trigger, and we are talking about this small trigger, not the big one, something with a tag light, then we are calling this enter stone state function. What it does is that it sets this stoned variable to true and set this exited from light to false. I will explain what it does in a minute. We are also changing the tag to untagged because if we see it here, this the tag of this object right now is enemy. Why we need to change the tag to untagged is that because the enemy and the player layers, they cannot collide. So we are changing this to untagged, which allows the player and the enemy to be able to collide so that the player can jump on top of the enemy collider. We are also enabling this collider because this one, which is enabled, is actually just a trigger. And we are calling the method setStoneMode to true from the enemy patrol, which is this one. It means that none of these will be executed, so the enemy will not be in alert mode and in patrol mode neither. And we are setting the current time to be equal to the wait time. I will explain this as I mentioned, and this is just sounds and graphics, it's not that important. So yeah, so if the light stays in the trigger, then the same function gets called again. Maybe this one is a bit overkill. I should just delete it, because on trigger enter and exit may be enough. Right now I felt safer to just leave it here, because on trigger stay is more resource heavy than enter and exit, but since this is a small game, I guess it's not too big of an issue. But the interesting thing starts here when the trigger exits the when the light trigger exits this trigger, because we are changing this exited from light to true. And what it does, so we are going back to the update. If the enemy is in a stone state and the exited from light is true, then it starts to reuse the current time by the time.delta time, which is the rate at which the screen is refreshed, if I'm not mistaken. And if the current time reaches or goes below 0, then we can exit the stone state. So why is this important? Because if this weren't here, then if the player removes the light, maybe accidentally, from the enemy just for a split second, then the enemy would become alive again and would immediately damage the player. And so basically it's just a sort of grace timer that we are granting to the player, so that like split seconds mistakes are not punished too harshly. And so if this current time reaches or goes below 0, we are calling the exit stone state function, which can be found here. So we are setting the stone boolean to false. We are changing back the object tag to enemy so that collisions don't happen. We are disabling the collider. However, the enemy trigger stays here. Yeah, I will show you the physics part. Just a second. I just finished the script first. So we are calling the set stone mode to false here. What it does, it allows the enemy to go into either alert mode or patrol mode, depending on where the player is within the big trigger or not. And here is just audio and graphics again. It's not that important. So just show this very quickly. So here we can see that the player and the enemy do not collide. However, the trigger events in this case still work, because only the tag is checked. No, it's the tag is, oh, I'm sorry. We are not changing this one, we are changing this one. Yes, because this whole thing is enemy. and this one is ground. Yeah, I was looking at tags and I should have said layer, so sorry. Anyway, this is the logic behind how the enemy works in Forest Adventure. And well, I hope this video was helpful in explaining how the enemy works. And well, if you have any more questions, just contact me. Thank you.